this video we'll be looking at some of the filters that are available to us in Photoshop, as well as taking a look at the crop tool. So to begin with, I'm going to open up this document here, and we'll start off by looking at the crop tool. So the crop tool is available to us underneath our selection tools here in the toolbar. And when I select the crop tool, we can see that we get this bounding box around the outside. So with this box, I can use this to drag in from the edges. So whether I want to change the width and height, I can drag these edges in to manually adjust the crop. Otherwise, I can choose from a drop down of aspect ratios from here. So I can select the original ratio. So when I grab from the corners here, it's going to keep that original aspect ratio. If I wanted to do a square, I've got that option there, which will constrain those proportions within a square. Otherwise, I can just go back to the width and height resolution, which will allow me just to stretch it out to any custom size. When I'm cropping, if I wanted to, say, make this image slightly narrower, what I can do is drag that in. We still get a bit of a watermark there on the side as to how much of the image is about to be cropped. And before I actually commit to the crop, I can commit to the crop up here in the control panel, or I can hit enter or return on the keyboard. Before I do that though, I've got the choice to delete these pixels that are currently outside or to keep them. If I delete them, they're obviously permanently removed from the image and it does reduce my file size. But you may want to come back in and bring them back into the document at some point. So if you untick that when you crop, you'll still be able to grab the crop tool and pull this back open to reveal them again. But I don't actually want to crop this and make it any smaller. Instead, what I want to do is make it longer. So if I grab the edge of this crop tool and drag it all the way out here, we can see that I'm now able to extend my crop. So basically I've got this canvas out here, obviously empty. Well, we do have some black, we've got a black background set up at the moment. So this black is now showing through this area where on my original layout there is no pixels. But before I commit to this crop, I can also come up to the control panel here and you can see there's a content aware option. If I untick that, it's just going to leave this area here as black. So if I turn this content aware on, what Photoshop will do is attempt to fill this area with pixels that reflect other pixels that are currently existing in the layer. So we'll see how this works. I'll come up to the top here in the control panel and I'll commit to this crop by ticking on the little tick there. And then Photoshop will take a moment to render that fill. And once it's done, we can see there that it's basically tried to replicate a similar sort of thing here in this area that was previously black. So I could come in and maybe retouch that area if I wanted to get it to look a little bit more random, but you can see it does a pretty good job at extending that canvas. One other thing we can do with our crop tool as well is we can straighten images that may be on a slight angle. This image is perfectly fine, but if I was concerned that the horizon was slightly on an angle, I could come up to this little straighten level here and click on that, and then I could drag across the horizon line if it was on an angle, and then Photoshop would rotate the canvas so that it straightens the image. But I don't want to do that with this image, so I'm just going to undo that crop. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the filters that are available to us in Photoshop. Generally, when it comes to working with digital images, it's a good idea to try sharpening the image to see whether or not that helps improve the clarity of your photos. So to do that, I want to make sure that I've got my layer selected. I'll just unlock it by clicking on that little padlock there, and then I'll come up to my filter menu. And then I can scroll down to where I've got my sharpening filters. And there's a number of different sharpening filters here, but the one that I like to use is the last one here, the unsharp mask. So I'll select that and that'll open up my unsharp mask dialog box. So from within here, I can click around to view different parts of the photo if I wanted to maybe focus in on the eyes. You can see here I've got the ability to zoom in closer or zoom out. You want to make sure that you've got this preview button turned on when you're playing around with the settings here, because that's going to reflect across your image in the background and you can see how it's looking. So basically with these settings here, we want to make sure that the amount is sitting at around 100% to begin with, and then usually the radius anywhere from 1 to 2 pixels. You'll find that if you pump the amount up more than 100%, up to about 120, you'll notice a marked difference. You don't want to push it too far because it's going to look like it's been doctored. So you want to try and keep that percentage down at around 100, 120%. Usually on an image that's already well focused, there's not too much sharpening that we need to do. So I'll keep it at about, say, 120 on this one. And then same with the radius, we want to keep that down relatively low, around 1 or 2. If I push that too far, we'll find that I end up getting a posterized type effect where my highlights tend to blow out and my shadows tend to darken. So I'll take that right back down to just 1 or 2 pixels. And then we can leave the threshold set to 0. It's only a subtle change that we're looking for here. So if I zoom in a little closer with my Command or Control plus to zoom in, and then I can turn the preview off. I'll zoom in a little closer still, and I'll turn that preview off. So that's how it's looking before and after. So we can see that by running that filter, it's adding a little bit of texture there to the skin. We can also see there in the hair that it does sharpen up slightly just by adding this unsharp mask. So I'll click OK on that, and then I'll zoom out by doing my Command or Control 0 just to fit the whole image onto the screen. And we'll take a look at one of our blur filters. Let's just say I wanted to maybe blur some of the flowers here that are in the foreground. What I can do is make a rough selection over that area. So I'll jump across and grab my lasso tool. And then using the lasso tool, I'll make sure I've got plenty of feathering on here. I might take the feathering up to 100 pixels. And then I'll just very roughly drag a selection around these flowers here that are in the foreground. Bring that back to the starting point. And now I can run a filter just on that selected area. So I'll come up to my filter menu and then drop down to where I've got my blur options. So the blur that I like to use when I'm blurring foregrounds or backgrounds is the Gaussian blur. So I'll come down to Gaussian blur and open that one up. Then I get my dialog box there, and we can basically see that's rendered the blur. If I didn't want it to be quite as strong as that, I can drag that radius right down. And we're just going to slowly pull that along until we're happy with the level of the blur. Because I created a feather as well, it should be a subtle transition from the blur into the sharper areas. I can turn that off, so that's where it was, and that's where it is now. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'll click OK. I'll just deselect by Command or Control D. And one last filter we'll take a look at is adding some grain to our image. So sometimes when you've made, say, a composite image and you've got a number of different images from different sources in the one photo, adding some grain over the top can help to blend and bring all these images together. So to apply some grain or some noise, I'll jump up to the filter menu and then just come down to my noise. And then under noise, I've got the add noise. So within the add noise dialog box, once again, making sure we've got our preview turned on there. Start that noise off at about 2. I'll bring it up a little bit more. And you can see if I push it too far, you end up with way too much grain. So I'm going to pull that all the way back down to about, say, 10%. I'll just zoom in a little bit closer on this and I'll just turn it off. So that's what it looks like without the grain. And then adding it back in. Adding that grain in there just can help tie your image together when you've got a number of different images from different sources in the one photo. So I'll just click on that. And there's some of the basic filters that I use on my photos when I'm working within Photoshop. As you can see under the filter menu, there are many more filters within there, but there's some of the key ones: sharpening, blurring, and adding some noise. Often when we're working with filters as well, you may want to actually turn the layer that you're adding the filter onto into a smart object. By doing that, it protects the integrity of the original pixels and allows you to use things like masks on your filters. We can change a layer into a smart object from the Layers panel just by right-clicking on the layer and coming down to Convert to Smart Object. We know it's a smart object now because it has this little thumbnail in the lower right corner in the Layers panel. And now if I run filters on it, it will actually allow me to create a mask, and I can actually use masks to determine where that filter runs. So that's a brief introduction to some of the filters that we have available to us in Photoshop, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we will look at some retouching techniques. See you there.